Greetings, friends of typography. People who use commercial fonts will often say they bought a font. But others might have a problem with that phrase and might say, no, you didn't buy a font, you licensed a font. They certainly mean well when they say that, but this supposed correction also has its problems. So time to clear all this up once and for all. Stick around and we will do just that. The debate around the word buying seems to come from the fact that we usually associate this word with physical objects and a change of ownership from the seller to the buyer. If you buy a book, for example, the intellectual property of the text and the pictures is tied to a physical object, and the ownership of that object can change. But with digital goods like ebooks, music files, picture files and any kind of software, there is usually no physical object anymore. And so instead of selling an object, we need a different legal process for the distribution and use of these digital goods. And this process is called licensing. With a license, the licensee gets authorization to use a digital good under certain conditions which are defined in the license agreement. So understandably, some people might want to say, I licensed a font. But this is also problematic because it is in conflict with the established definition of to license, which is the act of granting a license, not receiving one. This might feel counterintuitive because we like to tie the verb to our own actions. We rather say, I bought a book instead of a book was sold to me. And when we buy a font on a website, we are performing an action. But in a formal sense, this action leads to a license being issued to us. So after discussing the words and the problems that surround them, what should we say? If you are a font user and you want to use license as a verb, you should rather use a passive statement, like the font was licensed for the project. But in my opinion, it's also perfectly fine to say I bought a font or I purchased a font. And here's why. The connection to physical goods and ownership, while typical, isn't a requirement. Buying just means to obtain something in exchange for payment. And when we buy a font, we do obtain something, the license that is issued to us. So I think it's okay to say I bought a font. It is just a short and convenient phrase to describe a specific legal act. We just need to be aware of what that phrase means. Buying a font doesn't mean you own a font after the purchase. It means you obtain a license to use a font, or to be even more precise, to obtain a license that grants usage rights under the conditions described in the license agreement. But of course we need a shorter way of saying that, and buying a font can do that. After all, words and phrases don't have intrinsic meanings, they have usages, and what I just described is a meaning we can agree upon. And in my experience, professional users who make use of commercial fonts, stock photography and so on are well aware of how digital goods are treated legally. So among designers and other professional users, a phrase like buying a font shouldn't cause any problems. Misunderstandings are more common in relation to third parties like the client of a designer or design studio who might be asked to pay for a font license and then might expect access or even ownership of the font in return. In such a case, we might need to be more careful with our language and we will often have to explain the principles of licensing. And that's it for this episode. By the way, if you want to learn more about font licensing, you can check out my online video course, Font Licensing 101. Link is in the description.